Hello and welcome back to the PSD to HTML responsive portfolio build. Now that we've gotten our initial website set up, we've created our index.html file and got it looking absolutely beautiful. We're going to move forward and start filling out some of the content. So I'm going to jump into Finder, and here we have our Site01 folder. I don't want to overwrite all of the extensive changes that we made to that file, so we're going to take that, copy it, and paste it to create a Site02 folder. So let's rename this from Site01 copy to Site02. Then I want to open up Site02 in TextMate. And one way you can do that if you're using TextMate is we can drag that Site02 folder down to our dock and just hover it over the TextMate icon, and it opens up that entire folder there. So we can close this Site01 folder now because we're no longer using it. And now we've got Site02. So I'm going to click on index.html. And I want to jump into the head of our document and start filling out a couple of items here. Now, if you've spent any time at all using a mobile browser to browse different websites, you might have come across a website that has just been shrunk down so small inside the mobile browser that it's impossible to read any of the text. And in order to read the text, you have to go in and zoom in order to see the text and make it large enough so that it's even legible. Well, there's one small thing we can do to avoid that problem. By default, some mobile browsers will shrink your website down to fit the entire width of the site inside the mobile browser. So to avoid having that happen, we can use a simple meta tag, and the name of that meta tag is viewport. So name equals viewport, put that inside quotation marks. And then for our content for this meta tag, we're going to say width equals device width, comma, space, and then initial scale. So initial hyphen scale equals 1.0. That will basically, this line right here will basically scale everything in the browser so that it fits inside the mobile browser without you having to zoom in and out. So this is a very key tag to include in the head of every document, probably every document that you create from now on for the web, because a lot of people are going to be viewing your site in a mobile browser, and you want that to be mobile friendly. Now, if you have some kind of complicated site that has a lot of stuff running on it, that's going to have a lot of content inside it, and it's just not feasible for that to be viewed on a mobile browser, then you can do away with this meta tag in particular. I've worked on some websites very recently that have one page of the website that's almost a whole application within itself because there's so much functionality on that page. A lot of that depends on your customer, on your client, on who you're building the website for. Sometimes you can convince them to simplify it and split it up into multiple pages. Sometimes they want a bunch of content or a bunch of functionality on one page, and you have no choice but to just jam it all in there. And if you're going to do that, sometimes it won't work on a mobile browser. So in that case, you wouldn't have to worry about this particular tag. But if you want your websites to look good in a mobile browser, it's very important to include that particular meta tag. And so for now, that's all I'm really going to worry about in the head. That's one of the first things I always do when I'm creating a website now, that I wanted to go ahead and get that out of the way so that we didn't forget. So then we can jump into our body and just start filling out some of the content. So we're going to, let's take a look at our Photoshop file first. And the very first thing we see at the top, let me go ahead and hit Tab to get rid of our toolbars there, and let's zoom in to 100%. And at the top, we see our navigation bar. So this is something we talked about before, where we have a background that's going to extend to the edges of the browser, but then we have content within that background that's going to be inside this fixed width. So we basically need two levels here of HTML tags in order to get this to work. So what I'm going to do inside the body of our document, and this is going to be above the title here, my design portfolio, the very first thing at the very top is our navigation. So we're going to use the HTML5 element nav, and we're going to put our navigation inside that element. So anytime I create an element that has a closing element tag, I like to go ahead and create both the opening and closing tags before I put the content inside it. That way I don't forget to do that later. So this particular nav element is going to be the element with the gray background that extends all the way to the edges of the browser. But the content inside that nav element needs to be at a specific width. So we're going to put the content inside the nav within a div that has a class of container. Now again, you can give this whatever div or whatever class name you want to. I like to use container because it's used a lot. Bootstrap uses it, other front-end frameworks use it. It's a very commonly used class name. Again, you can call it whatever you want to, but I highly advise you to give it a name that makes sense. This is going to contain the main width of our content, and so we're going to use the commonly used class name of container. And like I said before, we'll go ahead and create the closing div tag there so we don't forget to do that later. So then inside the container, we can create the menu itself. So if we look at our Photoshop file, we see 4 menu items, and I'm going to put these in a unordered list. So we have home, work, about, and contact. So let's jump back into our code and let's create an unordered list that contains all of those items. So we're going to create an unordered list, and just for the sake of being able to style it appropriately, I'm going to give it a class name. And with my class names, I like to define what the content is, not what the content's supposed to look like. So I don't want to say something like horizontal navigation or inline navigation. Instead, what I want to say is nav list. This is a list that contains links for our navigation. So we want to give it a class name that describes the content that's inside it. So then we'll skip a couple lines, put our closing unordered list tag, and then inside that unordered list, we'll create all of our list items. So we're going to have a few list items here, and they're all going to be links. So we want to put an anchor tag in all of these. And for now, I'm just going to link to pound, which is basically just the current page. And we're not actually going to create this full site. We're just going to create the home page. So this right here is where you would replace this pound sign. You would replace that with whatever the link is to the page you want to go to. So index.html here. For the work page, it might be work.html or whatever. So we have our opening anchor tag and then the text that's going to be inside that link, which is home. Then we'll have our closing anchor tag and our closing list item tag. Then to speed up the process, I'm just going to highlight that entire list item, copy it, and paste it 3 times. And then we'll just go into each link and replace the text. So we have work, we have about, and then we'll have contact. Now, your SEO professional that you're working with might suggest different names for these buttons, something that's more SEO friendly, but for now we're just going to stick with these simple names: home, work, about, and contact. So that's our basic unordered list there, but you'll notice if we go back to our Photoshop file on the right, we also have some social media icons. So I'm going to go ahead and create another unordered list for those. So we'll come back over here. After our closing unordered list tag, we're going to create a second unordered list, and we'll give this one a class of social list, because again, we're describing what the content is, not what it's supposed to look like. So this will contain our social media icons. So we'll skip a couple lines, put our closing unordered list tag, and then we're going to have a few list items here as well. So li, and then again, we're going to have an anchor tag here. So for now, we'll just link it to the current page using the pound sign, or the octothorpe, or whatever you prefer to call it. And these are going to contain images. These are going to contain icons that we see here. And we're going to use the actual icons that we got from the YouTube and Twitter and Facebook sites. But we've already got them pulled into our document here. So later we'll just pull them out of our document so that we can actually see them. But for now, we're just going to enter in the HTML for it. So we'll have some broken links or some broken images for a while. But later on, we'll go in and create those images. So we have our opening anchor tag there, and then we'll point to our image. And we don't know what the source is going to be yet, but we can probably guess. We're going to put it in a folder called images / and then we have our YouTube image, and it's going to have some transparency on it. So we're going to make it in a PNG file, and we'll just call it youtube.png. Again, that's a file that hasn't been created yet, but we'll just make sure that we give it this folder structure and file name whenever we do create it. So after the closing quotation mark there, I'm going to put an alt tag here, which is always suggested when you're entering in your HTML. and we're just going to type YouTube. That's going to be the text that pops up if you hover over that image for a couple of seconds. It's also very crucial for SEO purposes as well. So there's our image tag. Then we're going to have our closing anchor tag and our closing list item tag. Then I'm just going to highlight that line, Command C to copy it, or Control C if you're using a PC. And then we'll just paste it twice because we have two more social media icons we're going to use. One of them is Twitter. So for our second one, we'll change this to twitter.png, and we'll change our alt attribute here to say Twitter as well. And then for our third one, it's going to be for Facebook. So we'll say facebook.png, and we'll change our alt tag, to read Facebook. And that gives us everything we need for our navigation. Now, obviously, we'll have to go in and style it later on, but for now, if we were to test our page, we're now inside the Site02 folder, so let's save that. Right-click on our file and open it up in Chrome. Then we can close the old version here, but here's our basic setup. It doesn't look quite like what we want it to look like just yet, but again, right now we're just doing our HTML. We'll get to the CSS and the styling later on, but for now that's a good start. So now that we've got the navigation done, in the next video we'll start moving down and take care of the header. We'll move on to the featured section later, and we'll just start building from top to bottom. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.